The sound was sharp enough to slice the night. One moment, I was standing in the doorway of my Raleigh farmhouse, coffee mug warming my hands, breathing in the sweet North Carolina air. The next, a crash. Not a bang, but the sharp musical explosion of tempered glass. I looked into the driveway. My black Escalade, the one Arthur bought me 2 Christmases before he died, 7 years ago, sat gleaming under the porch light, or it had been. Now the driver's side window was a spiderweb of glittering ruin. Standing beside it, chest heaving, was my daughter-in-law, Simone. She still had the dented metal trash bin clutched in her manicured hands. I didn't move. I couldn't. The steam from my coffee cup was the only thing that felt real. My son David stood just behind her. His expensive Atlanta suit jacket was open, his tie loose. He looked like a man trying to look in control while his world tilted. He didn't move to stop her. He didn't even flinch. He just adjusted the leather folder in his hand. "Mom," he said finally. His voice was quiet, but it cut deeper than the glass. "Please, just sign the papers." I looked at him, at the man I had raised on cornbread and Sunday sermons, the boy who used to run barefoot through Arthur's cornrows, yelling that he'd buy me a mansion one day. Now he was standing on my front walk, next to a shattered window, asking me to sell my soul. "David," I whispered. It was all I could manage. "This is family business," he pressed, taking a step closer, the gravel crunching under his $1,000 shoes. "Don't make this ugly." Behind me in the hallway, my daughter Maya's voice was a shaky whisper. "Mama, don't you go out there, not tonight. Lock the door." But I did. I stepped down onto the porch. The weathered wood creaked, a familiar sound in an unfamiliar nightmare. Every piece of broken glass sparkled up at me from the driveway, like a warning from heaven. Simone finally found her voice. It was high and tight. "You're being dramatic, Evelyn. You think this makes you a martyr?" She tossed the trash bin. It clattered on the asphalt, the sound echoing in the awful quiet. "You're ruining David's future." I met her eyes. "I'm protecting what's left of mine." David took another step, holding that folder out like it was a peace offering instead of a weapon. "Mom, you don't understand this money. It's not just about us. It's about legacy." "Legacy," I repeated. The word tasted like ash. "Son, you can't build a legacy on broken glass and lies." The air went still, heavy, the way it does before the thunder breaks. I could feel the neighborhood watching, curtains twitching. This part of Raleigh knows the difference between a family visit and a riot. Simone's eyes darted toward me, cold and sharp. She saw me looking past her, toward the small, winking red light of the security camera I'd installed by the porch gutter. An automatic alert for aggression and property damage. Simone's face twisted. You set us up." David's head finally snapped up. He looked pale. "Mom, this is out of control. Call them off." "You started this," Maya called from the porch, her voice steady now. "You two brought this trouble here." The blue and red lights bloomed down the street, washing the color out of the trees, the house, their faces. When the first patrol car pulled up, Simone tried to smile, tried to fix her hair. "Officer," she said sweetly, "this is just a misunderstanding, a little family dispute." The young officer looked from her, to my shattered window, to the metal trash bin lying on the pavement. "Ma'am," he said, his voice tired, "misunderstandings don't usually come with this much property damage." He turned to David. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside." "We're leaving," David said, trying to pull Simone toward their car. But the second officer was already circling the Escalade, his flashlight gliding over the broken glass and the dented bin. "Not yet, sir. We need statements." Handcuffs clicked shut. That sound, like a period at the end of a sentence I never wanted to read. As the sirens faded, carrying my only son away, I stood there in my robe. The wind brushed my hair, and I thought about how quickly love can turn into something you don't even recognize. The name Arthur's Acre was built on faith. But faith, I was learning, doesn't erase greed. I stood on that porch until the red and blue lights were just angry stars flickering out of sight. Maya came out and wrapped a thin blanket around my shoulders, her hand trembling. The driveway was quiet again, except for the sound of the wind whispering through the broken glass. I was shaking, not from the cold, but from the realization. This night, this awful, ugly night, it didn't start with a trash bin. It started long before that. It started with the lie whispered over Sunday dinners. It started with a bank account that didn't balance. It started with trust that had cracked in quiet places long before my window ever did. Rally nights have their own perfume. Honeysuckle from the fences, damp earth, and a touch of old money and new secrets. I was born into that mix. My name is Evelyn, 55 years old, and now a widow. This place, Arthur's Acre. It wasn't just land. It was 42 acres of red Carolina clay just outside Raleigh, and it was my whole life. Folks around here called it the pride of Wake County. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. My late husband, Arthur, was the farmer. I was the bookkeeper. Together, we built a life that smelled of fresh soil, growing everything from sweet corn to kale long before it was fashionable. He had hands that could fix anything, and a laugh that could calm a thunderstorm. Then, 7 years ago, Arthur went out to fix a fence after a summer storm and never came back. A heart attack. Quick, silent, merciless. I buried him under the pecan tree that still shades the old barn. Some nights, when the wind pushes through those branches just right, I swear I can still hear him whistling. A change is gonna come, he always sang. After Arthur died, everyone expected me to sell. You're too small to compete, Evelyn, they said, pity in their eyes. Let the corporations handle it. But they didn't know me. My mama didn't raise quitters, so I kept Arthur's Acre running. Through bad harvests, equipment breakdowns, and floods that turned my fields into mirrors for 7 long years. I fought to keep that land alive, until I realized something Arthur never had to face. The town around us had changed. The farms were gone, replaced by gated communities with names like Riverbend Crossing and Sweet Magnolia Estates. The children of farmers became bankers and influencers. The soil that once grew food now grew profit. That's when the call started. Developers. They wanted my land. Prime location. Close to the new highway. I ignored the first dozen offers. But one afternoon, after a long day at the farmer's market, I looked out across those empty fields and realized I was tired. Not just physically tired. Down to the bone. Tired of fighting a war with time. The final offer came from Highland Development. $1.2 million, cash. It was enough. Enough to retire. Enough to travel. Enough to finally start the scholarship fund Arthur always talked about, for young Black students who wanted to study agriculture but didn't have the means. It wasn't an easy yes. Selling that farm felt like closing the last page of a love story. But I told myself that sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go. So I signed the papers. I thought I'd finally earned my rest. I thought the fight was over. I was wrong. The fight had just changed its name. You see, I have 2 children, 2 halves of my heart, split right down the middle. David, 33, my firstborn. He was smart, charming, ambitious. Too ambitious, maybe. He'd left Raleigh at 21 with a finance degree and a promise to make something of himself. He made it all right. 3-piece suits, a house in an Atlanta suburb big enough to echo, and a wife, Simone. Simone had 500,000 followers on some app and a talent for turning every breakfast into a photo shoot. She was beautiful, polished, and as hard as the diamonds she wore. Then there's Maya, 29, my heart in human form. She's a school teacher who still lives 10 minutes away, drives a battered Ford truck that belonged to her daddy, and believes grace is louder than money. She has Arthur's hands, the kind that build and heal. When I told them I'd sold the farm, their reactions told me everything I needed to know. Maya came over that night, a bottle of wine in one hand and a box of tissues in the other, just in case. When I told her the news, her face lit up. She threw her arms around my neck and cried. "Mama, you've earned your rest," she whispered, her voice thick with relief. "You finally earned it." We celebrated, right there on the porch, dreaming of scholarships and maybe a little trip to the coast. I called David the next morning. I was so full of that peace, I wanted to share it. "David, honey, it's Mom." "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice distracted. I could hear typing in the background. "What's up?" "I just wanted to share the good news. I sold the farm." The typing stopped. The line went silent. Not a happy silence. A cold, heavy silence. "David?" I asked, the pea starting to curdle. "You what?" His voice was flat. "I sold it," I said, a little weaker. "To Highland Development. It was a good offer, baby. It's time for me to rest." "Rest?" he repeated. He didn't say it like a blessing. He said it like an insult. "Mom, I have to go." The line clicked. He'd hung up on me. I stood in my kitchen, the phone buzzing with a deadline, and that peaceful feeling was gone. In its place, something cold and sharp had started to grow. The silence from David lasted 3 days. 3 days where I tried to recapture that feeling of peace, but it was no use. The cold knot in my stomach just pulled tighter. He called on a Thursday evening. I saw his name light up the screen, and my hand actually hesitated. "David?" "I've been thinking," he said, skipping right past, "Hello." His voice wasn't warm. It was the clipped, sterile voice of his finance job. "You sold the farm, without even asking me." I took a breath. "David, honey, it was never your burden to carry. That farm was your father's and mine." I heard him laugh. It was a sharp, bitter sound. Nothing like the laugh I'd raised. "Burden? Mom, that wasn't a burden. That was an asset. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I gripped the kitchen counter. "I've secured my retirement, David. I've secured the scholarship fund Arthur always wanted." "The scholarship?" he scoffed. "Mom, I had investors lined up. People who could have tripled that money. We could have built something." "We did build something," I said, my voice rising. "Your father and I built a life." "I'm talking about a real legacy," he shot back. And that word, legacy, hit me like a stone. That land is our family's heritage, and you just sold it for pennies on the dollar to some developer. I was stunned. Pennies? David, it was $1.2 million. It was worth 5, he said, the lie so quick and confident it almost sounded true. With my partners, we could have turned it into luxury estates. Real profit. I finally understood. He wasn't upset I'd sold the farm. He was furious that he couldn't. He wasn't grieving the loss of his childhood home. He was grieving the loss of his commission. "David," I said quietly, "who are these investors?" "They're people you wouldn't understand, Mom. They're people who see the big picture, unlike you, apparently." "My picture is pretty clear, son," I said, my voice as cold as his. "I've earned my rest." "Rest is for people who've given up," he said. "I have to go. We'll talk about this when I come down. We're going to talk about this." The line went dead again. I stood there, the silence of the farmhouse pressing in. He hadn't asked how I was. He hadn't congratulated me. He had just shown me, in no uncertain terms, that my rest was his problem, and my son had a history of making his problems disappear. If David's call was a cold wind, Simone's was a warm, sweet poison. She called the next day, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "Evelyn, darling, I'm so sorry. David told me. He's just so passionate about the family's future." She didn't wait for me to reply. "Listen, I'm in Raleigh for a trunk show. Let me take you to lunch. A real lunch? You deserve it." I should have said no. My gut, the one Arthur always trusted, was screaming at me. But I was still a mother, and the thought of fixing this, of smoothing it over, was a powerful one. "That would be nice, Simone," I said. She chose a new place downtown, one of those chic, minimalist places that serve salads with names longer than their portions, all concrete floors and fragile glasses. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting by the window, glowing in a cream blazer and gold hoops. A tiny phone tripod was standing guard over her iced coffee, the camera lens pointed at her. "Evelyn," she beamed, standing to air kiss me. "You look amazing. Retirement has you glowing." "I think that's just humidity, dear," I said, sitting down. She laughed, loud and practiced, the kind of laugh meant to be overheard. Once the small talk was over, her followers, the weather, she leaned in, lowering her voice like she was sharing something holy. "David and I are starting a new venture," she said, her eyes glittering. "A luxury retreat brand, sustainable, wellness-focused, very high-end." She reached into her expensive purse and pulled out a glossy brochure. "We're calling it Arthur's Haven. Doesn't that sound beautiful?" My husband's name on this flimsy piece of marketing. "It sounds expensive," I said. She smiled wider. "Exactly. That's why we thought you'd love to be the primary investor. Imagine, your name, Arthur's name, attached to something timeless, a real legacy, living forever." There it was again, that word. Legacy. I set down my fork. "Simone, I sold the farm so I could rest, not so I could rebrand myself." Her smile faltered, just for a second. "Oh, it's not work, Evelyn," she insisted, her voice a little tighter. "It's trusting the next generation. It's letting David finally take his place." "Trust is earned, Simone," I said quietly, "not branded." She blinked, then she forced another smile, but I could see the edges cracking. The air between us was suddenly as cold as the concrete floor. "I guess some people just don't understand modern business," she said, taking a delicate sip of her water. The rest of the lunch was short. That night, I was sitting on the porch, the uneaten lunch sitting like a stone in my stomach, when my phone rang. It was Maya. She answered on the first ring, still wearing her classroom voice. Gentle, calm, the opposite of her brother's sharp energy. "Mama," she said, and I knew from her tone that this wasn't a social call. "Don't invest a single penny with David." My heart jumped. "He called you too?" "Yes," she said, her voice heavy. "He asked for a small loan, said he needed it until a big bonus clears." "But Mama, he's been lying about those bonuses." The crickets in the yard seemed to go silent. "What do you mean, baby?" I ran into his old co-worker from the finance firm, Michael, at the grocery store. I asked how David was doing. Maya paused, and I heard her take a shaky breath. "He hasn't worked at that firm in months, Mama. Michael said he left in a hurry. Something about a disagreement over an account." The silence on the line felt heavy, sticky, like summer heat before the lightning. "Be careful, Mama," Maya whispered. "Please. Something's wrong." I hung up, the porch swing creaking in the quiet. My son was unemployed. He was lying. and he was desperately trying to get his hands on my money. This was no longer a disagreement. It was a plan. Maya's warning left a metallic taste in my mouth. Unemployed. Lying. The words echoed in the farmhouse kitchen the next morning as I sorted the mail. It all looked so normal. Bills, seed catalogs I still received out of habit, a letter from the church, and then I saw it. An ordinary white envelope. Not junk mail. It had the heavy, important feel of bank paper. The return address was Savannah First National Bank. That was my bank, the one Arthur and I had used for 40 years. I almost tossed it aside, thinking it was just another statement, but the words urgent account confirmation were printed in red. I slid it open with my thumb. The morning sun slanted across my kitchen table, lighting up the ink like it wanted me to pay attention. Confirmation for your line of credit extension. For a long moment, I just stared at it. I hadn't applied for a line of credit. I hadn't applied for any loan in over a decade. My hands went cold. I fumbled for my reading glasses on the counter. The paper was official, embossed, the kind that carries weight and confidence. My name, Evelyn S. Sanders, was there in neat black print, my address, my social security number, and the amount. $250,000. $250,000. My hand started to shake. This had to be a mistake, a clerical error. I called the bank. My fingers felt thick and clumsy on the keypad. The young woman who answered had the bright scripted cheer of customer service. Thank you for calling Savannah First National. This is Marcy. How can I help you today? Yes, I said, trying to keep my voice even. My name is Evelyn Sanders. I've received a confirmation for a loan, a line of credit. I didn't apply for this. Oh dear, she said. Let me pull that up for you, Mrs. Sanders. Can I get the reference number from the top of the letter? I read it to her. I heard a few clicks of her keyboard. Then she went quiet. The forced cheer in her voice vanished. Mrs. Sanders, she said, her voice careful now. It looks like this was an online request. It was made 3 days ago through our secure client portal. I don't have a client portal, I said, my voice sharp. I do my banking in person. She said. I heard more typing. Well, it says here the request was verified. It was verified through a secondary contact on file for account management. A what? A secondary contact? Who? She hesitated. I could hear her reluctance. Ma'am, the secondary contact authorized for account management is Mr. David Sanders. The room tilted. The floral wallpaper seemed to blur. My son's name, printed neatly next to mine. When? I whispered. When was he authorized? Marcy was all business now. I'm looking at the file. It was an in-person filing. He was added last November. Months before I sold the farm. Months before he was unemployed. Right after he'd come home for Thanksgiving. All smiles and compliments. This wasn't an impulse. This wasn't a desperate mistake. This was premeditated. Ma'am? Marcy asked. Mrs. Sanders, are you still there? Yes, I said. My voice was a ghost. Thank you, Marcy. You've been very helpful. I hung up the phone. I stood in my kitchen, the sun shining, the birds singing outside, and I felt nothing but ice in my veins. He had been planning this for months. I knew then, standing by the sink, that this wasn't a family problem I could fix with love. This was a war I needed to fight. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that I couldn't fight it alone. The next afternoon I drove downtown. The Raleigh skyline felt foreign, all sharp glass and steel, a world away from the soft rolling fields of Arthur's Acre. I parked in a concrete garage that smelled of exhaust and climbed the steps to a law office whose name I hadn't needed to speak in 20 years. Scott, Monroe, and Blake. The Blake was Lena. Lena wasn't just my lawyer. She'd been my college friend, back when we were two young black women dreaming of changing the world. I'd gone on to build a farm. She'd gone on to become one of the best financial litigation attorneys in the state. Sharp as a scalpel and twice as precise. When I walked into her office, she looked up from her computer and the sharp attorney's mask melted. "Evelyn," she said, standing to hug me. "Lord, it's good to see you. You look old," I said, trying to smile, and scared. Her smile faded. "Sit, talk." Over a cup of coffee that was much too strong, I laid it all out. The sale, David's anger, Maya's warning, and finally, the letter for the $250,000 line of credit. Lena listened without interrupting, her pen scratching quietly across a legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back and her eyes were fierce. "This isn't just family drama, Evelyn," she said, her voice hard. "This is felony territory, forgery, identity theft. He's been planning this." "I know," I whispered. "But Lena, he's my son." "Which is exactly what he's counting on," she shot back. "He's counting on you to be a mother. Right now, you need to be a victim." As she was speaking, my phone, sitting on her polished desk, vibrated. I glanced at it. An email. The sender was an address I didn't recognize. "Truth comes quietly from some encrypted mail service." The subject line read, "Check who's selling your name." My blood ran cold. I showed it to Lena. She raised an eyebrow. "Don't open it on your phone. Let me." She forwarded it to her secure terminal. A few clicks, and the email was on her big screen. There was almost no text, just one line. "He's in deeper than you know," and one attachment. Lena opened it. It was a screenshot, a simple, clean screenshot of an online banking dashboard. The username at the top of the screen read, Arthur's Legacy. The last login location, Atlanta, GA. I felt the air leave my lungs. Arthur's Legacy. He had turned my husband's memory into a front for his crimes. "He's sloppy," Lena murmured, her eyes scanning the image. "And he's desperate." "What do I do?" I asked. My voice was trembling, but a new feeling was mixing with the fear. A cold, hard anger. "You set a trap," I said, surprising myself. Lena looked at me, a slow smile spreading across her face. "That's the Evelyn I remember." "Call him," Lena said. "Be the confused and scared mother he expects. Tell him you got a scary letter from the bank and you need his help. Invite him to dinner, him and Simone." I took a deep breath, my hand shaking as I dialed David's number. He picked up on the second ring. "Mom, is everything okay?" "David," I said, letting the tremble into my voice. "Oh, baby, I got a scary letter from the bank. Something about a loan. I'm so confused." I heard him sigh, that practiced patient sound. "Oh, Mom, don't you worry about a thing. It's probably just a mistake. Can you and Simone come for dinner?" I whispered. "I'm so worried. I need your help." The line was quiet for a beat. Then his voice, smooth as butter. "Of course, Mom. We'll be there Saturday. You just relax. We'll take care of everything." "Thank you, baby," I said, and hung up. I looked at Lena. My heart was a cold, hard stone in my chest. "He's coming." "Good," Lena said, picking up her pen. "This time, we'll be listening." Saturday arrived with a sky the color of a fresh bruise, all purple and gray. I spent the day cooking. Fried chicken, collard greens, macaroni and cheese, so thick the spoon stood up in it. It was David's favorite meal. I'd made it for his birthday, for his college graduation, for the day he brought Simone home and told me she was the one. Today, it felt like a Last Supper. Lena had dropped off a small digital voice recorder, no bigger than a car key. "Your phone is fine," she'd said. But this is better. Put it under the placemat. They arrived at 7, all smiles and expensive cologne. Simone was wearing a white dress, the picture of innocence, and she brought me a bouquet of lilies, the kind they have at funerals. Evelyn, your house smells like heaven, she cooed, air kissing my cheek. It's just dinner, dear, I said, my hand brushing the small, hard shape of the recorder in my apron pocket. We ate. We made small talk. We talked about the weather, about Maya's students, about Simone's brand. David was charming. He was the son I remembered, laughing and telling stories. For a moment, I almost let myself believe I was wrong, that the bank was a mistake, that Lena was just being a lawyer. Then I cleared the dessert plates. David, I said, my voice sounding small in the dining room. That letter I told you about, the one from the bank. I pulled it from my pocket and slid it across the polished oak table. It's for $250,000. Simone's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went flat. David picked up the letter, glanced at it, and chuckled. Oh, Mom, he said, folding the letter and sliding it back to me. I told you not to worry about that. Worry? I said, okay, my heart starting to pound. David, it says I took out a loan. No, we did, he said smoothly. It's for the Arthur's Haven project. You signed off on it last month. Don't you remember? I stared at him. The lie was so bald, so easy. I did what? David, I never signed that. He looked at Simone, a practiced look of concern on his face. She picked up her cue perfectly, placing her hand on mine. Evelyn, she said, her voice dripping with pity. You've been under so much stress lately. The sale, Arthur's anniversary. You signed the portal documents. We were both there. The blood drained from my face. They were creating a narrative. They were gaslighting me, right here at my own dinner table. I think I'd remember signing for $250,000, I said, my voice cold. David's smile vanished. The son I knew disappeared, replaced by the man from the phone. This is what I'm talking about, he said, his voice hard. Your memory. It's worrying us, Mom. He leaned forward, dropping the act. Look, this is simple. You're confused. You signed. It's done. The money is already working for us. That's fraud, David, I whispered, my hand moving toward the recorder. No, he snapped. It's strategy. But if you're going to be this difficult, if you're going to fight me on this... He sat back, crossing his arms. His eyes were cold, clinical. Then maybe you're not fit to handle this money at all. If you fight me, Mom, I will file for financial guardianship. I'll tell the court you're incompetent. And I'll win. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't the theft. It was the threat. He wasn't just planning to steal my money. He was planning to steal my name, my mind, my right to be a person. David, I whispered, the room spinning. You wouldn't. Try me, he said, standing up from the table. Don't make this ugly. Just let me handle it. It's better for everyone. He and Simone left the macaroni and cheese half eaten on their plates. I just sat there, the silence of the room roaring in my ears, my hand clutching a small, hard recorder that had just captured the sound of my own son declaring war. The recorder felt heavy in my hand, heavier than a brick. I sat at that dining table for an hour after they left. The smell of fried chicken and collard greens, once a comfort, now just smelled like betrayal. The next morning, I was at Lena's office before her assistant had even finished making the coffee. I didn't say a word. I just walked in, sat down, and placed the small black device on her polished mahogany desk. She raised an eyebrow. That bad? Worse, I said. We sat in her office, the blinds drawn against the bright morning sun, and listened. We listened to the clink of silverware. We listened to my small talk, And then we listened to my son's voice, clear and cold, threatening to strip me of my own mind. I will file for financial guardianship. I'll tell the court you're incompetent, and I'll win. When it was over, Lena clicked stop. She didn't look at me for a long moment. She just stared at the recorder, her jaw tight, her knuckles white as she gripped her pen. Well, she said finally, her voice dangerously quiet. He just declared war. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The tears I'd been holding back all night finally came hot and angry. He's my son, Lena, my baby. How can he? He's not your baby anymore, Evelyn, Lena said, and her voice was no longer that of a friend. It was the voice of the attorney I'd hired. He's an adversary, and he just handed us our entire case on a silver platter. She stood up and began to pace, the heels of her shoes clicking an angry rhythm on the hardwood floor. This isn't just a threat, she said, thinking aloud. It's leverage. But more than that, it's a symptom. She stopped and looked at me. People don't pull out the incompetent card unless they're desperate. He's not just trying to get money, Evelyn. He's trying to hide something. The $250,000? I asked. No, Lena said, shaking her head. That's bait. That's the messy, obvious crime he's willing to let you see. He's hiding something bigger, something cleaner, something that $250,000 is supposed to distract us from. She went to her computer. The Arthur's Legacy account from that anonymous email. He's sloppy, but he's not stupid. He's using that $250,000 as a smokescreen for the real fire. She picked up her phone. I'm launching a full forensic investigation. I'm putting a PI on his Atlanta life. I'm subpoenaing his bank records, and I'm going to find out what Arthur's Legacy really means. She turned to me, her eyes sharp. This is no longer about getting your money back, Evelyn. This is about making sure he doesn't take everything else. You have to be ready for what we find. I wiped my eyes, the anger finally burning away the tears. I've been a farmer's wife for over 30 years, Lena, I said, my voice steady. I know how to dig, find it all. Lena's investigation was a quiet, brutal thing. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing. I stayed at the farm, went through the motions. I packed up Arthur's clothes for the church donation. I walked the fields, the red clay dust covering my shoes. I tried not to look at the porch, where my son had threatened to steal my mind. Then Lena called. Her voice on the phone was different. No warmth, no anger, just a flat, cold precision. Evelyn, she said, I need you to come to my office. Now, and I need you to bring your original deed for the farm. My heart hammered against my ribs. The sale. Did something go wrong? Just come, she said, and hung up. I found her in a conference room, not her office. The long polished table was covered in stacks of paper. Bank statements, legal forms. They looked like weapons. You were right, Lena, I said, my voice shaky as I sat down. He was hiding something. He was, she said, not looking up from a file. The $250,000. That was just his seed money. This is the harvest. She slid a thick, glossy document across the table. It was a mortgage agreement. I don't understand, I said. I paid off the farm mortgage 20 years ago. Arthur and I burned the papers in the backyard. You did, Lena said. This one is 6 weeks old. I picked it up. My name was at the top. Evelyn S. Sanders. The property listed was 42 acres, Arthur's Acre, Wake County, and the amount, $600,000. The lender was a company I'd never heard of. Lexan Capital Partners. Lena, I didn't sign this, I whispered. I know, she said. She pointed to the last page. My signature, forged, looped confidently across the line. He did this before the sale to Highland Development was finalized, Lena explained, Her voice a low, angry hum. He used a fraudulent power of attorney, one he clearly had made years ago and just kept, waiting. He mortgaged the farm, I said, the words feeling foreign and toxic on my tongue. He took out a $600,000 loan against my land. Your land, Evelyn, Lena stressed, which you were in the middle of selling. He was planning to let the sale go through, let Highland pay you the $1.2 million. He would have kept this $600,000. She leaned forward. And the best part? The bank, Lexon Capital, would have come after Highland Development for the money, claiming they had the first lien. He was going to let them fight it out in court, while he and Simone walked away with your money. I just stared at the forged signature. It was so close to mine, so practiced. He wasn't just planning to take the $1.2 million, I murmured, the full scope of his greed finally hitting me. He was coming for this too, all of it. He's not just a son, Evelyn, Lena said. He's a predator, and he's been watching you, his own mother, as his prey. My eyes scanned the signature page again. There was another name, a witness. Witnessed by... I read the sloppy, familiar cursive. Mr. James Henderson. My blood went from ice to fire. Mr. Henderson? Mr. Henderson was my neighbor, 80 years old. He had been Arthur's best friend. He had served as a pallbearer at my husband's funeral. Lena, I said, my voice shaking with a new kind of rage. He didn't just use me, he used him. I didn't even call Lena back. I left her office, the $600,000 mortgage papers clutched in my hand, and I drove. Mr. Henderson lived just 2 miles down the road. On a small plot of land he'd had even longer than we'd had Arthur's acre. He was 80 years old, moved slow, and had a heart as big as the Carolina sky. He and Arthur used to sit on his porch for hours, drinking sweet tea and talking about the soil. When I pulled into his gravel driveway, he was on that same porch, rocking in his chair, a plaid blanket across his knees. He smiled when he saw me, a genuine sunlight smile. Well now, Evelyn, this is a treat. Come to sit a spell with an old man? My heart ached. I couldn't smile back. I walked up the steps, the heavy mortgage papers feeling like a sin in my hands. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice thick, I need to ask you about something. His smile faded when he saw my expression. What is it, child? You look like you've seen a ghost. Almost, I whispered. I sat down in the rocker opposite him, but I didn't rock. I just held out the signature page from Lena's desk. Do you recognize this? I asked. Your name. As a witness. He fumbled for his glasses, the ones held together with tape at the hinge. He perched them on his nose and took the paper, his aged, calloused hands trembling slightly. He squinted. Well, yeah, that's my scribble. Witness, what is this? Some bank paper. He looked up at me, his eyes cloudy and confused. David brought this by. I went still. When? Oh, about 6-7 weeks ago, maybe, he said, tapping the paper. He was in a powerful hurry, flew up in that fancy Atlanta car of his, said he was in a rush back to the city. What did he tell you it was? I asked, my voice barely a breath. Said it was an appraisal document, Mr. Henderson said, the words coming slow as he tried to remember. Said with the sale of your place, the county needed a local confirmation of the land value. Just paperwork, he said. Said it'd help you out. He looked at the paper again, his brow furrowed. He said you were busy, and he was just trying to help his mama. I thought I was helping too. He looked up at me, and his eyes were so clear, so innocent. My own eyes filled with tears. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice breaking, this isn't an appraisal. It's a mortgage. For $600,000. His face went slack. The blood drained from it, leaving his dark skin pale and ashy. What? David used my name. He forged my signature. And he used you as a witness to steal my farm. The elderly man stared at the paper, his mouth open. He looked from the paper to my face, and his eyes, when they finally focused, were filling with a terrible dawning horror. No, he whispered. No, that boy, Arthur's boy, he wouldn't. He did, I said, and the tears finally spilled, hot and angry, down my cheeks. He dropped the paper like it had burned him. It fluttered onto the porch. He put his head in his hands, and his frail shoulders began to shake. Oh, Lord God, he sobbed, a terrible dry sound. I didn't read it. He said he was in a hurry. I just signed. I just signed, Evelyn. I thought I was helping Arthur's family. I didn't. Oh, Lord. He was crying. This proud, good man, crying on his porch because my son had turned his kindness into a weapon. I went to him, kneeling on the worn wood, and put my hand on his shaking arm. It's not your fault, Mr. Henderson. He tricked you. He used you. He used us. He looked up, his face a mask of shame and grief. Evelyn, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I know, I said, my voice hard with a new resolve. And now you have to help me make it right. I need you to tell my lawyer, Lena, exactly what you just told me. I need you to sign an affidavit. He wiped his face, and the man Arthur had called his best friend was back. His eyes were clear and angry. You call her, he said, his voice firm. I'll sign whatever you need. That boy has no honor, and he won't get away with this. Not while I'm still breathing. Mr. Henderson's affidavit gave Lena the ammunition she needed. The witness to the fraud was now our witness, but Lena wasn't celebrating. When I met her back at the office, she was on the phone, her face like granite. Find him, she said into the receiver. I want to know what he eats for breakfast and who pays for it. Yes, today. She hung up without saying goodbye. That was your PI? I asked. It was, she said, tapping her pen on the desk. Mr. Henderson's affidavit is perfect. It nails David to the wall on the $600,000 forgery. But I'm not satisfied. She leaned forward. I've been digging into this lender, Lexan Capital Partners. And they're barely legal, Evelyn. They're a high-risk, high-fee private equity firm, the kind of place that preys on people who are already drowning. They specialize in quick, dirty loans with impossible interest rates. I didn't understand. So David was desperate. No, Lena said, her eyes narrowing. That's the part that doesn't fit. A man like David, a finance guy, he wouldn't go to a shark like this unless he was in on the scam. Or unless Simone gave him a reason to. Her name keeps popping up in their visitor logs, Evelyn. Places David wasn't. Her phone buzzed. A new email. She clicked it open and her face went hard. And now I know why, she said, unless his wife was sleeping with the CEO. She turned the large monitor on her desk toward me. My hand flew to my mouth. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a photograph. Simone, my daughter-in-law. She was at a restaurant, one of those dark, expensive Atlanta places. She was laughing, her head tilted back, her hand resting on the arm of a man. He was handsome, sharp, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first tractor. He was leaning in close. Too close. Lena clicked to the next photo. The two of them, leaving the restaurant, getting into the same car. The final photo was a time-stamped image from a hotel lobby. Them, walking toward the elevators, his hand resting on the small of her back. Who is he? I whispered. Jalen Ross, Lena said, her voice flat. CEO and founder of Lexan Capital Partners. The room was suddenly too cold. It wasn't just an affair. It was collusion. The $600,000 loan, I said, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening snap. She was with him to get the loan approved. She wasn't just with him, Evelyn, Lena said, turning the screen back. She was the liaison. David forged your name, but Simone used her assets to push the fraudulent paperwork through. She's not just a greedy wife, Evelyn. She's a co-conspirator. I sank back into the leather chair, my stomach turning. The image of Simone, standing in my driveway, her hand on her stomach, flashed in my mind. You'll never see your grandchild. I looked at Lena, my eyes wide with a new horrifying realization. Lena, I whispered, the baby. Lena met my gaze, her expression full of pity. Given what we're looking at, Evelyn, I'd say that child's paternity is very much in question. I thought I was ready. I thought, after the forged mortgage and Simone's affair, that nothing else could shock me. I was wrong. I was in the garden, my hands deep in the soil, trying to feel something real, something clean, when Maya's old truck came barreling up the driveway. She didn't just park. She skidded to a stop, dust flying. Mama, she yelled, jumping out before the engine was even off. She was waving a white envelope, her face pale with a panic I'd never seen in her. What is it, baby? I said, standing up, my knees aching. She couldn't speak. She just handed me the envelope. It wasn't from a bank. It was from the Wake County Superior Court. My hands, covered in rich, dark soil, fumbled with the seal. I pulled out the papers, legal language. In the matter of petition for, and then I saw it. Petition for emergency guardianship. My name, Evelyn S. Sanders, and the petitioner, David Sanders. I read the words, but my brain couldn't assemble them. Citing advanced dementia, paranoia, financial incompetence. He had done it. He had actually done it. Mama, what is it? Maya whispered, her eyes wide with fear. He filed, I said, my voice a hollow echo. He's taking me to court. He's telling a judge I'm insane. I read more, my eyes scanning the page, seeing the evidence he had submitted. My mother is suffering from severe memory loss, frequently forgetting conversations and major financial decisions. She has become paranoid, accusing her family of theft. She is currently in a state of confusion regarding a $250,000 line of credit she herself authorized. He was using the $250,000, the first, smaller crime. He was using it as proof that I was losing my mind. He wasn't even mentioning the $600,000 mortgage. This was his move. He was painting me as a confused, paranoid old woman, and he was using my own love for him as the frame. He had made his move first. A hearing date was set. In 2 weeks. I sank down onto the porch steps, the legal papers fluttering in my dirty hands, the system I'd trusted, the courts, the law. He was turning all of it against me. He was going to make me sit in a courtroom, in front of a judge, and defend my own sanity. For a moment, all the fight went out of me. The anger, the resolve, it just evaporated, leaving me cold and empty. He was going to win. He was going to take it all. My farm, my money, my name, and now, my mind. Maya sat down next to me, her small hand covering mine, and we just sat there, the shadows of the pecan trees growing long across the yard, like a cage closing in. I sat on those porch steps for a long time. The false ending felt so real, I could almost taste the defeat. Then Maya's hand squeezed mine, hard. No, she said, her voice quiet but fierce. He doesn't get to do this. He doesn't get to win, Mama. I looked at my daughter. In her eyes, I saw Arthur's fire and my own. The next morning, Lena filed a motion to delay the emergency hearing, citing new and overwhelming evidence that required time to process. The judge, irritated by David's emergency petition, granted it. "He thinks he's won," Lena said, her voice sharp over the phone. "He's arrogant, and arrogant people love to celebrate." "What are you suggesting?" I asked. "You're not going to fight him in court, Evelyn," Lena said, a new cold excitement in her voice. "You're not going to let him drag you onto his stage. You're going to build your own." "A dinner," I said, the idea forming, whole and terrible and perfect. "A legacy dinner." "Exactly," Lena said, "to celebrate the transfer of the estate. We'll make it an apology for your confusion." We set the stage. The farmhouse dining room, the good china, the silver Arthur and I got for our wedding. We invited everyone, David and Simone, of course. They accepted immediately, their voices smug with victory. I had Lena send a special invitation to Jalen Ross, CEO of Lexon Capital, to celebrate our new family partnership. He too accepted, blinded by his own greed. We invited the president of Savannah First National Bank. We invited two of the local investors David had told me about, the ones he'd been trying to impress. And Lena invited one last guest, a family friend from her college days, Detective Callahan, a tall, quiet man with eyes that missed nothing. He'd be posing as Lena's date. The night of the dinner, my house smelled like roasted chicken and apple pie. It smelled like forgiveness, but under it, the air thrummed with something else. Justice. David was radiant, playing the part of the dutiful son. He pulled out my chair. He laughed. Simone, in a dress the color of money, floated around, her hand never leaving her stomach. Jalen Ross was slick, shaking David's hand, his eyes lingering on Simone a moment too long. The bankers and investors all smiled, ready to talk business. We ate. We talked. I nodded. I smiled. I played the part of the frail, forgetful mother who had finally seen the light. When the dessert plates were cleared, David stood up, tapping his glass with a spoon. The sound was bright and false. "Thank you all," he said, beaming. "Thank you for coming to celebrate. As you know, my mother she's had a hard year. We've decided as a family that it's time for her to rest, and for me to take my place at the head of the Arthur's Acre legacy." He raised his glass. "To the future." "To the future," I echoed, my voice soft. I stood up, my hand trembling just enough. "David is right. It's time for me to rest. But before I officially sign anything, I wanted to share something." I gestured to the wall by the fireplace, where Lena had helped me set up a projector screen. I've been a little confused lately, as David said," I murmured, "so I started collecting things to help me remember." I clicked a remote in my hand. The lights dimmed. The first image flashed on the screen. It was grainy, time-stamped, silent. My black Escalade, the metal trash bin lifting. Simone's face, twisted in rage as she smashed my window. The room went dead silent. Simone's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. "What is this?" David whispered, his smile gone. "Just a misunderstanding," I said. Click. The screen went black, and then only audio. David's voice, cold and clinical, filled the room. "I will file for financial guardianship. I'll tell the court you're incompetent, and I'll win." The bank president's face went white. He stared at David, who looked like he'd been struck. "Mama," David started, standing up. "Turn that off. That's out of context." "Is it?" I said. Click. The next image, the $600,000 mortgage, my forged signature blown up, next to a high-resolution scan of my real one. Below it, Mr. Henderson's signed, notarized affidavit, his testimony clear. He said it was just an appraisal document. Jalen, David said, his voice a panicked hiss at the CEO. She's... And speaking of Mr. Ross, I said. Click. The last photo. Simone. Jalen Ross. The hotel lobby. His hand low on her back. Simone let out a sound, a small strangled sob. David's head snapped toward Jalen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He hadn't known. He hadn't known about the affair. You, David whispered, looking at his wife, at his partner. The betrayal was so complete, it was almost beautiful. Turn it off, David roared, lunging for the projector. I wouldn't do that, son. A new voice, calm, authoritative. Lena's date, Detective Callahan, stood up from his chair. His suit jacket was open, revealing the badge on his belt. Mr. Sanders, he said, as two uniformed officers stepped through the back door. You, Mrs. Sanders, and Mr. Ross are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and elder financial abuse. Simone crumpled, her wail a thin, ugly sound. Jalen Ross stood frozen, his face gray. But David just stared at me. The arrogance was gone. The charm was gone. All that was left was the hollow, terrified boy. Officers moved in. The click of handcuffs was the loudest sound in the room. As they led David past me, he stopped, his voice trembling with a venom born of pure defeat. You ruined me. You ruined your own son. I looked at him, not the man, not the predator, just the boy. No, David, I said, my voice quiet, steady, and clean. You did. The dinner was over. The house was clean again. The trials were swift. Lena, with the recordings, the photographs, and Mr. Henderson's tearful testimony, had built a case that was airtight. The truth, once it finally decides to speak, is deafening. David was sentenced to 7 years in a state facility. He lost his licenses, his reputation, and his freedom. Jalen Ross and his company, Lexon Capital, were buried in lawsuits, not just from me, but from dozens of others who came forward after the news broke. Simone. She took a plea deal, testified against both men, claiming she was a victim of their manipulation. She lost the baby. I learned about it later, a quiet, sad end to a child used as a bargaining chip. I felt a strange, cold grief for the life that never was, another innocent lost in their web of lies. She vanished after the trial, scrubbing her social media clean, becoming a ghost. The fraudulent $250,000 line of credit was nullified. The $600,000 mortgage was voided. The sale of Arthur's acre, the $1.2 million, was finally, truly mine. It took 6 months for the dust to settle, for the lawyers' calls to stop. 6 months for the farmhouse to just feel like home again. One bright spring morning, I stood with Maya on the steps of the local university, the sun warm on our faces. We were holding a comically large pair of scissors. The sign above us was new, painted in the university's colors. The Arthur's Integrity Fund, an agricultural scholarship. It was the scholarship Arthur had always dreamed of, funded by the land he had loved. It was for young Black students, just like he'd wanted, but with a new mandatory class: financial ethics and asset protection. As the flashbulbs popped, I looked at Maya. She was glowing, her smile as bright as the morning. This, I said to the small crowd, this is legacy. It's not what you take, it's what you build. It's not what you hide, it's what you protect. Later that day, back on the porch, the mail came. Just one letter, tucked between catalogs. It was from the state correctional facility. My hand reaching for it was perfectly steady. The return address wasn't required. I knew the handwriting. Inside there was a single page, filled with David's cramped, angry script. It was full of excuses, full of if only, and she made me. He blamed Simone. He blamed Jalen. He blamed the market. He never once blamed himself. At the bottom of the envelope was a small black USB drive. Mama, his letter concluded, I'm sending you this. It's from my home security. It's Simone, talking to Jalen on the phone, plotting. It proves she set me up. It proves she's the one who started it all. You can use it. You can show them I'm not the monster they think I am. I held the small piece of plastic in my palm, this tiny black rectangle. More proof, more lies, more pain. I could have watched it. I could have called Lena. I could have spent another year of my life tangled in his darkness. I walked inside to the fireplace Arthur had built. I knelt on the hearth. I struck a match, lit the corner of the letter, and dropped them both, the excuses and the proof, onto the grate. The plastic hissed, sparked, and melted into silence. The last of his poison was finally turning to ash. I'm done playing judge. I'm done being a witness. I'm done digging up graves. Maya came over that evening, just as the sun was setting, painting the fields in shades of gold and rose. She brought 2 glasses of sweet tea. We sat on the porch swing, the familiar chains creaking a familiar song. We didn't talk about David. We didn't talk about money. We talked about the first scholarship recipients. We talked about the garden I was planning to plant. You know, Maya said softly, leaning her head on my shoulder. It feels peaceful here, for the first time in a long time. I looked out at the dark horizon, at the land Arthur had loved, at the home I had fought for. The air was cool, clean, and full of honeysuckle. Yes, baby, I said, sipping my tea. It does. The story ends here, but the healing it began is still unfolding. Thank you, my dear friends, for spending this quiet time with me. If Evelyn's journey touched your heart, tell me where you're listening from. Give this story a rating from 0 to 10, so I can see how far our porch of stories reaches. Until next time, dear, take care of your heart, and may God's peace guide your steps.